I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that, because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it. I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend?
Everyone is back with us. I remember when that happened right before I came on the air. It was an extraordinary moment, but unsurprisingly, The Atlantic goes even deeper. Tim Heaphy, let me read this to you. Quote, when I asked Milley recently about this episode, his answer was predictably lengthier, more caustic, and substantially more fervent. Quote, there's a lot of discourse around whether it's a tough army or a woke army, he said, referring to the commentary on right-wing news channels. Here's my answer. First of all, it's all bull bleep, Bill Barr's favorite word. Second, these accusations are coming from people who don't know what they're talking about. They're doing it for political purposes. Our military wasn't woke 24 months ago, and now it's woke. He continued, you want woke? I'll give you woke. Here's what your military is doing. There are 5,000 sorties a day, including combat patrols protecting the USA and our interests around the world. At least 60 to 100 Navy warships are patrolling the 7 seas, keeping the world free for ocean transport. We have 250,000 troops overseas in 140 countries, defending the rules-based international order. We've got kids training constantly. This military is trained, well-equipped, well-led, and focused on readiness. Our readiness statuses are at the highest levels they've been in 20 years. So this idea of a woke military is total, utter, made-up bull bleep. Tim Heaphy?
Yeah, I think what he's frustrated about, Nicole, is the president's persistent attempt to dive into the day-to-day work of the uniformed military in the Department of Defense. And that was a theme, right? The president wanted to deploy troops on the streets in the summer of 2020. He wanted protesters to be shot in the leg. There's this notion that I think Milley really resists, that the military is there to do the president's own bidding, that they're sort of extensions of him. Really interesting parallel to the way he looked at the Justice Department. You used Bill Barr's term there. Bill Barr had similar frustrations because the president thought the Justice Department was there essentially as his lawyers to pursue crazy ideas that he had that didn't have the basis in fact and law. So with General Milley, with Bill Barr, he was faced with people that appreciated the historic independence and the mission, the historic mission of those venerable agencies. The president never got that, and still, I don't think, gets that frustrated General Milley, a frustrated Attorney General Barr. And it became a theme of our investigation, the lack of respect for traditional institutions that plays out in lots of different ways leading up to January 6th and informs his reaction in the day surrounding the election.
I mean, Tim, I think what your investigation bears out is it's not the institutions that protected the country from Trump. It's a very, very, most depressingly small group of individuals inside the institutions that protect the country from Donald Trump. And at DOJ, I mean, Bill Barr leaves, so I mean, you know, he's a fantastic witness, and he's now a good pundit on the strength of the government's case against Trump. But he didn't stay till January 6th. So you've got Donahue and Rosen, right? What's to stop Trump from putting Jeff Clark there? And I think the Pentagon is even scarier, right? I mean, at the Pentagon, you had Milley. I mean, Mike Flynn, pretty pardoned and waiting to be tapped. I mean, what did you see that could make us feel that in the hands of people like this, we'd be as safe as we were with the people that were there on January 6, 2020?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's the right question, because you're 100% correct. These institutions come down to people with whom we trust these traditions, with whom we place the independence of the Justice Department, the independence of the military. And thankfully, there were people that in a crisis moment protected those institutions. What is to say now that in another Trump term, there would not be a sort of a different standard that puts those people in those positions of defending democracy? People ask me all the time, Nicole, what was the most surprising thing that you learned over the course of the January 6th investigation? And my answer is always, we came close to a different outcome, but for the strength and courage of conviction of a handful of people that in a crisis moment put the rule of law over their own political self-interest, we could have had a different outcome. So democracy comes down to people. So getting it right, getting the right people in those jobs, in those institutions, absolutely paramount to the protection of democracy.
Well, and Charlie, the people, because it was a Republican administration, end up being a handful, again, a pathetically small number in terms of numbers. I'm not calling any of the individuals pathetic, but the number of them is shockingly small, and they're not all still there. And I wonder what you make of the fact that we're left to wonder whether unchecked by a Milley or a Donahue or a Rosen or a Raffensperger, everything that Milley sort of stands on the line and pushes back against becomes the new normal in this country.
Well, and I think that Donald Trump understands that. He understands that in Trump 2.0, he's going to have to surround himself with a different breed of loyalist, that he feels that this was the deep state that stopped him from executing what he wanted to do, and he won't make that mistake again. So I do think about this. And in fact, you run through the very, very small list of names who made a difference. If you had different officials in Georgia or Arizona or Michigan, if Mike Pence had made a different decision, if members of the Justice Department had gone a different way, what would our history have been? Will those people be in place in 2025? Will they be standing there? And to General McCaffrey's point, which I don't want to gloss over, under our Constitution, there are very few limits on what the commander-in-chief can do. What if the commander-in-chief says, I do want the military to do exactly what I want? The members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff do not have the power to countermand his orders. Under our Constitution, we had the assumption that there would be checks and balances. But what are the checks and balances besides impeachment, which we now know is pretty much a dead letter? So, you have these twin problems. That thin blue line may no longer be there. And Donald Trump may have figured out that under the Constitution, he can do a lot of things that he can't be stopped. That there are no guardrails. So this is one of the reasons to be alarmed. This is not something that we can just simply hope that things will work out because the institutions will stand against him. People need to reread the Constitution, but also to look at how fragile those institutions have turned out to be.
Right, and how much they rely on norms.
People.
General McCaffrey, I want to ask you a two-part question here. I mean, it strikes me that one of the reasons, I don't know this, but I surmise that one of the reasons this extraordinary body of reporting came out early this morning is because there is a new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, newly confirmed. C.Q. Brown was confirmed yesterday in this extraordinary Tommy Tuberville workaround. And Chairman Milley may feel more free to speak more openly about his tenure. But it also strikes me that anyone starting a new role in the military, any apolitical leader, may be looking at our own country the same way Zelensky is right now in the Oval Office. I mean, it's hard to make assumptions or plan much beyond the next presidential election. Do you think that is on the minds of the military leaders?
Oh, I don't think there's any question of it. The international community is the same way. Putin certainly has been incentivized by Trump's behavior and the MAGA Republicans in the House to think all you've got to do is continue savaging civilian populations in Ukraine until the election, and maybe he wins. Look, there's no question in my mind. Back to Mark Milley, I've known him since he was a colonel. He's an officer of enormous integrity. He's beautifully educated, well-read, and sensitive to the rule of law. He's also a very tough person, both in combat under fire. He's a Princeton hockey player. You can't push this guy around. So he was uniquely qualified to play this role. But I think the caution we just heard that the next time around, if you decapitate the institutions, the FBI, the Marshal Service, the CIA, Homeland Security, and put loyalists without a sense of respect for the law in there, we could be in trouble. There's always an assumption historically, come on, that couldn't happen here. The 1930s, Germany, a civilized nation descending into autocracy, we better worry about it. And Trump is a leading contender, and this is not a political statement. He's entirely unqualified to be the commander-in-chief. He's a danger to the republic, and that's where we stand.